So, all right, okay.
I'll just check if we are live.
And do you do an introductory spiel, or how
Yes.
does it go? Yeah, okay, go ahead.
I'll introduce you,
That's
and then we'll start the conversation. I'll just see. Let's give them a minute to join.
Sure.
We are live on YouTube, so hi everyone, those who are joining in, please share this video with your friends, like the video, of course, so that more people can see it on their screens on YouTube. So do like those who are joining us right now. I'm also sharing it on our groups. Perfect. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Karwan, the Heritage Exploration Initiative. It is a collective, students' collective, trying to revolutionize maybe the way we understand the past and how it kind of reflects on our future and or on our present. We started our journey in 2019, and since then we have organized more than 250 scholars on their talks on our platform, and many heritage walks in Delhi, around Delhi, trying to contribute our bit to the understanding of the discipline of history, which is kind of very dynamic. And to add to that whole this dynamic nature of history, we have a special guest today who brings out a new aspect of an event that played a big role in the future of in the future of the Indian subcontinent, which was the partition that happened in 47. We have a very special guest, as I said, Dr. Venkat Dhulipala. Thank you so much, sir, for accepting the invitation. So, Professor Dhulipala is Associate Professor of History at University of North Carolina, Wilmington, and he teaches courses on the history of modern South Asia, comparative colonial histories, and introductory surveys of in global history. He received his PhD in history from the University of Minnesota in 2008, and his first book, the title of the talk today as well, Creating a New Medina, State Power, Islam, and the Quest for Pakistan in Late Colonial North India especially, was published by Cambridge University Press in 2015. He is currently working on a second book as well, which I won't reveal for the time being. But we are going to talk about the partition, what role did state power had, Islam had, and what was that whole campaign for Pakistan in colonial North India, which also sheds light on either an unknown territory of Indian history. Let's know it from our speaker today. Thank you so much, sir, for accepting the invitation. And over to you. And I'll see you after the lecture for a conversation. And those who are joining us can send in their questions in the live chat. We'll be reading those out, and we'll be trying to answer as many questions as possible towards the end of the conversation. Over to you, sir.
बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद ईशान, and to all of you who are who are gathered today on a weekend evening when there's also a very interesting cricket match taking place between India and England. Well, thank you for joining. इस किताब को छप के तो अभी 7 साल से ज्यादा हो चुके हैं, और जब ईशान से हमें ये न्योता मिला कि हम इसके बारे में आपसे कुछ बातचीत करें, तो पहले तो थोड़ा ताज्जुब हुआ कि अभी भी इसके बारे में लोगों को थोड़ी बहुत दिलचस्पी है। और पहले तो मैंने कहा कि रहने दीजिएगा, कि अगली किताब जब आएगी तो तब हम आपके सामने उपस्थित होंगे, लेकिन फिर ईशान ने कहा कि भाई आप अपनी पहली किताब के बारे में ही हमसे बातचीत कीजिए। तो फिर मैंने बात मान ली उनकी। एंड वेल, I guess, well, this is the cover of the book, and this came out, as I said, in 2015. The title is, of course, Creating a New Medina. And this is a book about the partition, about the ideological origins of Pakistan. And what I will do today is basically lay out the basic arguments of this book, located in the field of partition historiography. And then we'll kind of, carry it forward based on your questions that I get. Now, as far as India's partition is concerned, as Ishan began by saying, that it is perhaps the defining moment in the history of modern South Asia. Reams of print, or lots has been written about the partition, beginning from, say, the 1980s, especially, once you have the declassification of papers in London, and you have the publication of these massive transfer of power volumes. And so you have the first wave of partition historiography, which begins really seriously from the 1980s. And the first book in this regard is, of course, Ayesha Jalal's sole spokesman, Ayesha Jalal being a Pakistani American historian. And the sole spokesman made a big splash when it was published. And one of the reasons for it was its very revisionist thesis, for that time period, for that era. Now, if one were to look at the common sense as far as the partition is concerned, well, in India, for example, they'll say, they were the British, and they were vengeful enough, and as they left India, as they departed India, they partitioned us and left. And so partition happened as a result of the classic British divide and rule strategy. Now, be that as it may, Jalal's book tried to look at the voluminous transfer of power volumes to try and go through those negotiations that happened between the top leadership of the Indian National Congress, the Muslim League, and the British administration. And her thesis was that, putting aside this British divide and rule theory, the other commonsensical view was that, of course, Pakistan was created as a result of Mr. Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the leader of the Muslim League, who espoused the two-nation theory, which claimed that Hindus and Muslims were not just two communities in India, but two separate nations, which therefore deserve nation states of their own. And it is because of Jinnah's obduracy, his skillfulness when it comes to negotiations over transfer of power, which ultimately led to the creation of Pakistan. Now, Ayesha Jalal's argument sought to overturn this common sense as far as the creation of Pakistan is concerned. What Jalal argued was that for Jinnah, Pakistan was basically a bargaining counter meant to achieve for the Indian Muslims maximum rights, maximum protection of their interests in an undivided British India. She points out, or she rather pointed out, to the cabinet mission plan, which she said came close to what Jinnah wanted, which is why he even agreed to it. But given Nehru and the Congress's rejection of the cabinet mission plan, Jinnah's strategy came apart and partition happened in the end. So the responsibility for India's partition was shifted from Jinnah onto the shoulders of the leaders of the Indian National Congress. As far as popular understanding of Pakistan is concerned, Jalal argued that Pakistan was this very vague idea, this emotional slogan that most Muslims in the Indian subcontinent had very little clue about, and that they basically rallied behind the great leader, the Qaid-e-Azam, and of course, the Muslim League, which was declared by Mr. Jinnah, the sole spokesman of the Muslim League, to be the sole authoritative representative organization of the Indian Muslims, Musalmanon ki Wahid Numayinda Jamaat. Now, this thesis came out in 1985, and its significance lay not just in the shifting of the responsibility for the creation of Pakistan or for the partition on the leadership of the Indian National Congress. What the sole spokesman did, what else did the sole spokesman do? It does a couple of other things. One, it argues, therefore, that Pakistan's putative father of the nation, in fact, never even wanted the nation state to come into existence. And two, even as it became clear that it would come into existence, Jalal argued that Mr. Jinnah wanted Pakistan to be a Kemalist kind of a state, a secular state, a Muslim majority state, but certainly not an Islamic state. What was also pointed out that the Muslims most opposed to Jinnah were the ulama, these mullahs, especially those belonging to the Jamaat al-Ulama Hind, which was aligned to the Congress party. And given the fact that these ulama referred to Mr. Jinnah as Kafir-e-Azam, so on and so forth, and given the fact that Mr. Jinnah was this very anglicized figure who barely spoke any Urdu, most of his speeches were in English, which were translated by somebody else, during his public meetings into Urdu or whatever happened to be the local language. That this was a man who wore suits, who drank Scotch whiskey, ate ham sandwiches, raised dogs, smoked cigars, never went on a Hajj, didn't grow a beard. And so, given the fact that Mr. Jinnah was this extremely modern, anglicized figure, one cannot imagine him ever wanting to bring an Islamic state into existence as far as Pakistan is concerned. So that was the overall significance of the Jalal argument. Now, this argument was pushed back. There was a pushback against this argument a couple of years later by Anita Inder Singh, who did an Oxford PhD. Jalal did her PhD at Cambridge, and Anita Inder Singh is an Indian academic who was doing a PhD at Oxford. She wrote a book called The Origins of the Partition of India, which came out with Oxford University Press, in which she argued that contrary to the Jalal argument, Mr. Jinnah always wanted Pakistan from the very beginning, and he therefore skillfully negotiated with the British as well as the leaders of the Indian National Congress and ended up achieving what he really wanted to achieve. But even though the Inder Singh's argument was contrary to Jalal's, they at least shared one foundational or fundamental assumption. And what is that assumption? The assumption again is that, and Jalal, or rather Inder Singh agrees with Jalal, that as far as Pakistan is concerned, the ordinary public had very little or very vague idea as to what this meant. They imagined Pakistan in as many ways as they possibly could. Now, once this historiography of elite negotiations, this phase ends, and you have, well, of course, the 50th anniversary of the partition, which comes up in 1997. And around that time, a little before, a little after, you have a new wave in partition historiography in which historians say, let's forget about great man history. Let's look at how the partition impacted the people. So let us try and recover memories of those affected by the partition and not bother about great man history, because those guys did what they had to do. But it is the many millions, the masses of India, who suffered the consequences of a decision they very little understood. And so this next wave, therefore, condemns great man history. Following that, of course, you also have attempts to look at partition through the lens of film, cinema, analysis of literature, which comes out of the experience of the partition. But in all this, again, there is again this fundamental agreement or a consensus that Pakistan was this very vague idea that nobody knew about, and it just happened as an accident of history. It is as if people of the subcontinent were sleepwalking off a cliff. Now, my own book, I started by asking this very simple, in my own mind, that's how it began, asking this very simple question, that if this is a very argumentative country, and Amartya Sen wrote a book called The Argumentative Indian. If this is a very argumentative country and you kind of see it, if you live here, I grew up in UP, and I've lived in Hyderabad, and, of course, the United States, but living in India, you see that things are discussed, debated, thrashed out. There is extensive and intensive debates in India on just about everything. And to therefore imagine that what was the most pressing concern, issue of the 1940s, ever since the Muslim League, Lahore session, when the bombshell of Pakistan is dropped, to imagine that there was no intelligent discussion, debate on the question of Pakistan, that kind of sounded strange. So I decided to try and find out how was the idea of Pakistan discussed, debated, fought over in the public sphere. What did people understand by it? What did it mean to them? Did they actually understand the meanings and implications of Pakistan? And I chose Uttar Pradesh, or well, at that point in time, it was called the United Provinces of Agra and Awadh, as the site of my investigations, because what is very clear is that support for the idea of Pakistan, as also, of course, opposition to the idea of Pakistan, began in UP, where, of course, it received, the idea of Pakistan, of course, received overwhelming support. Much before this idea catches fire in the Muslim majority provinces where Pakistan actually comes into existence. And so I did not look at any of the transfer of power volumes. I did not go through them at all. I started looking at the press, especially the Urdu press. And to kind of just go off on a slight tangent, there must be plenty of you who are Hindi speaking or from North India. आप हिंदी तो आराम से पढ़ लेते होंगे, समझ भी लेते होंगे. उर्दू पढ़ना लिखना सीख लीजिएगा आप. It would also expand your repertoire, yeah, and it would allow you to do research or greatly expand, yeah, the areas in which you can conduct research. Now, coming back to my own project, I began to look at a number of Urdu newspapers which were published from UP. There was a newspaper called Medina, which used to come out of Bijnor. Then there was Hindustan, which was brought out by the Congress party. Especially, it was started in the context of the Muslim Mass Contact Program. The Congress started in 1937, yeah, and it kind of ended by 1939 once the Congress ministries resigned. I started to look at pamphlet literature, poetry, so on and so forth. And what really then strikes me is that contrary to this fundamental assumption, which has, which the field has kind of lived with since 1980s, yeah, for 30 years, is flawed. That there is a tremendously passionate, intensive, extensive, continuous debate on Pakistan, starting from within a few weeks of the passage of the Lahore Resolution. And it continues through 1945, 1946. Yeah, 1945-46 is when the elections are held, which the Muslim League deems to be a referendum on Pakistan. And what I argue is that Pakistan was not just this vague idea, but that it was popularly imagined as an Islamic state, as a modern Islamic state, a new Medina, as some called it. And that to therefore imagine that the leadership took decisions which the ordinary people had no clue about is questionable. That is one thing. The second thing, what I argue is that contrary to this belief that Mr. Jinnah was the sole spokesman as far as Pakistan is concerned, is also to be questioned. There are a welter of voices on the question of Pakistan, both in support of Pakistan and in opposition to Pakistan. And indeed, if you look at my book, it is each of these chapters in the book are structured around a series of intra-Muslim debates on the question of Pakistan. Now, besides arguing that there was a popular debate in which common people joined in, even through writing letters to editors of Urdu newspapers, sending in essays on the idea of Pakistan, what they understood by it, why they supported it, why they opposed it. The second thing I also show is that far from Mr. Jinnah being vague on Pakistan, he defines it at great length with in fairly clear terms. The idea is that it's going to be a sovereign state with all the attributes of sovereignty that any sovereign state enjoys. So this other idea that Mr. Jinnah was vague on, what Pakistan meant is also something I pushed back against, based on, of course, Mr. Jinnah's own speeches, which were, of course, collected in a couple of volumes, which those are available everywhere now. Thirdly, that far from Mr. Jinnah being the modernist figure, he and his acolytes, people like Liaquat Ali Khan, who are these modernists who are kind of arguing for Pakistan and are being opposed by these traditional Muslims, or the ulama, the reactionaries, the retrograde, these people who just know their holy books and nothing else. I kind of also repudiate that. I show that Mr. Jinnah and the Muslim League, they crave for and also gain alliance with a significant section of the Deobandi ulama. And in this regard, a significant figure is Maulana Ashraf Ali Thanavi. It's called Thanavi because he's from Thana Bhavan in UP, who comes to the aid of Jinnah and the Muslim League from 1937 onwards. In fact, Ashraf Ali Thanavi's fatwas are printed and used during these campaigns, during these by-elections. There are about 9 or so by-elections which are held to various Muslim seats in UP after the main elections, in which the Congress party comes to power, and in the context of the failure of a coalition government, Congress Muslim League coalition government happening. What you have is then a series of contests which happened between the Congress and the Muslim League between 1937 and mostly 1937-38, in which, of course, the Muslim League sweeps these elections, most of them. And in these elections, Ashraf Ali Thanvi's fatwas supporting the Muslim League are utilized by the party as it tries to defeat the Congress and therefore claim credibly that it is Musalmanun ki Wahid Numayanda Jamaat. The third thing, what I also show is that Pakistan was meant to not just be a Muslim majority state. How Mr. Jinnah and his colleagues in the Muslim League, as also the ulama aligned to them, they do claim, argue that Pakistan will be created as an Islamic state. Now, what that Islamic state is going to look like, that is something which will be devised or that will be figured out once Pakistan has actually come into existence. As Mr. Jinnah, and I quote it in my book, it's 7 years now, and I don't remember the exact words, but let me try and see. But yeah, I need to find it. But what he says is that, right now we are trying to get hold of this piece of land. Once we achieve it, you are free to build a mosque upon it. That's what Mr. Jinnah tells one of the functionaries of the Jamaat-e-Islami. His own colleagues, people like the Raja of Mahmudabad, Liaquat Ali Khan, so on and so forth, they too talk about Pakistan. Khaliq-uz-Zaman is another one. They too talk about Pakistan in terms of an Islamic state. In fact, the UP Muslim League puts together a committee which will work out a blueprint for an Islamic constitution for Pakistan. One of its members is, of course, what's his name? I'm blanking out. It was from Azamgarh. I'm kind of blanking out on this alim's name, but I think he was a student of Shibli. I'm forgetting his name now again. What's his name? Just okay. I'll let it be. But then. What blueprint is Sayyid Suleiman Nadwi. Sorry, this is Sayyid Suleiman Nadwi. And so this committee includes people like even Maududi, Sayyid Suleiman Nadwi, Azad Subhani, Abdul Majid Daryabadi, who used to be the editor of a newspaper called Sidh, and of course, wrote a multi-volume biography of Ashraf Ali Thanvi. Besides, of course, Muslim League politicians such as Ismail Khan, Khaliq-uz-Zaman, and others. And they actually come up with a blueprint. It's not discussed, but later, after Pakistan is created, in fact, Sayyid Suleiman Nadwi is invited to come to Pakistan. And he is asked to, let me just, again, I should have kept that page going, but yeah. So, the Pakistani government invited Nadwi to head the Talimat-e-Islamiyah, a special committee which was set up to give advice to the Constituent Assembly of Pakistan for preparing an Islamic constitution for Pakistan. So it's not as if the work of this committee is unimportant, because it actually is convened. It comes up with a blueprint of sorts, And then the chairperson of this committee in this is then invited from India to Pakistan. Sayyid Suleiman Nadwi is invited to come to Pakistan to head this Talimat-e-Islamiyya. But the term New Medina is something which is to be credited to a student of Ashraf Ali Thanvi, a man by the name of Maulana Shabbir Ahmad Usmani, who describes Pakistan as a new Medina. And in fact, what he does is that he juxtaposes, or rather he uses Pakistan and Medina interchangeably. So he claims that the Prophet created the first Medina in the Arabian Peninsula 1300 years earlier. We are only creating a second Pakistan in history. Or the Prophet created the first Medina, we are creating only the second Medina in history. And the argument is that, of course, we have had Muslim states or Muslim monarchies and kings and people rule, states ruled by by people claiming to be Muslim, but we never really have had an Islamic state ever since the first Islamic state created by the Prophet. And therefore, Pakistan is significant in that sense because it's only the second time in Islamic history that an Islamic state is actually going to be created. Now, besides this Islamic argument, and of course there are several ways in which this Islamic state is going to be kind of talked about. Various metaphors, various similes are used. As far as the leadership of the Islamic State is concerned, in fact, I quote a very interesting metaphor used by Shabbir Ahmad Usmani, and in which somebody asks him, who's going to lead Pakistan? Who's going to be the leader of Pakistan once it comes into existence, given the fact that this is supposed to be an Islamic state? And Shabbir Ahmad Usmani comes up with this brilliant metaphor. He says that people going on Hajj from India to the Holy Land in Hijaz, they go on ships which are skippered by English captains. However, these English captains of these ships, once they come into the vicinity of the port of Jeddah, they stop because there are these treacherous underwater rocks and shoals close to the port, which these English captains are not competent to negotiate. So therefore they stop, and from the shore, an Arab pilot comes in this little kashti, a dho, whatever you call it, gets onto the ship, and it is he who then pilots this ship to the shore, enables the faithful to disembark, step on Holy Land, and then perform the Hajj. Usmani says, Mr. Jinnah is like the English sea captain. He can only take us thus far. But once we are close to the target of Pakistan, the ulama will take over. Usmani also points out to the parallels between the creation of the first Medina or the first Pakistan and the creation of the second Pakistan or the second Medina. He says, just like in the Prophet's time, the Prophet did not create Pakistan in Mecca because, of course, there was significant opposition to the message that he came with. Therefore, he does the hijrat to Medina. And of course, the Hijrat is very important. It is the year 1 of the Islamic calendar as well. Goes to Medina, is accompanied by his followers, loyalists, whatever you may call them, called the Muhajirin, yeah, who migrate with him from Mecca to Medina. There, they get cooperation of the locals, the Ansars. And together, the Ansars and the Muhajirin, under the Prophet, create the first Islamic polity in Medina. And indeed, Medina becomes the locus for the rise of Islam as first the new dominant power in Arabia, and then the wider world beyond when it becomes a global power or a global civilization. And therefore, the idea is that Pakistan similarly would, like the first Medina, mark the rise of Islam as a major power in the 20th century world under Pakistani leadership. The Muslim League leadership, Mr. Jinnah, the ulama, they are kind of on the message, so to say. And this is a message which combines both so-called secular arguments, in quotes, as well as religious arguments, like the ones that I just kind of briefly mentioned. So the first thing that Mr. Jinnah and the Muslim League have to kind of bury, the first argument that they have to bury is that Pakistan is going to be a weak state. It's going to be stillborn. So therefore, what do? They come up with elaborate arguments talking about Pakistan's geo-body, which there is a discussion of Pakistan's natural resources, infrastructural assets, strategic location, its dynamic soldierly population. And when it comes to strategic location, look, it's pointed out that Pakistan is part of this continuum of Muslim or Islamic countries. And so to imagine that Pakistan will be on its own when confronted with a much bigger India is kind of a false kind of an idea. And so there is, of course, an enormous amount of discussion of this. Secondly, the other idea which is pointed out is that if you look at demography, there will be similar numbers or the numbers will be similar when it comes to Muslims who would be left behind in Hindu India and non-Muslims who would be left behind in Pakistan. And what this gives rise to is what is openly described as a hostage population theory. The idea is that in case Muslims are going to be persecuted in India, something similar can happen to the non-Muslims in Pakistan areas. And therefore, it is this mutual balance of terror which is going to preserve peace in the subcontinent, even after the coming into existence of these twin states, India and Pakistan. The other argument, which is of course held forth by Mr. Jinnah and the Muslim League elite to to their base is that you need to sacrifice, you need to make some sacrifice to bring about this Islamic State in existence. And in fact, Jinnah, in a speech in Kanpur, 1941 or 1942, I don't remember exactly now, openly says that he is willing to allow the 2 crore Muslims of the minority provinces to be smashed for the sake of the liberation of their 6 crore brethren in the majority provinces. In the Urdu press, of course, it's talked about as Jinnah साहब ने ये कहा है कि वो अकलियत जो मुसलमान अकलियत में है, जहां पर भी माइनॉरिटी में है, वो उनके शहादत के आखिरी रस्म अदा करने को तैयार है. Now, the last point I would like you to kind of take, and because I want to stop here because we are approaching about the 45-minute, 50-minute mark as far as my talk is concerned, is that even though there are all these arguments put forth by Mr. Jinnah and the Muslim League in favor of Pakistan, the idea that this is going to be a sovereign Islamic state, it's going to be a powerful state, that this is going to be the new leader of the Islamic world. And in fact, one of the Muslim League leaders from UP, a man by the name of Khaliquz Zaman, says that what we are aiming at is the creation of a Quranic state in which all these political divisions between all these different Muslim states, Muslim countries, they are going to kind of disappear. And what we will have is one large Islamic state which encompasses all these Muslims of the Islamic world. Now, this idea of Pakistan as a sovereign, powerful Islamic state is sharply criticized by ulama as well as some more modernist thinkers who assail this idea. And in fact, as I said, the first pamphlet which criticizes the idea of Pakistan comes out within 4 weeks of the Lahore Resolution. And it is authored by this man by the name of Maulana Sayyid Muhammad Sajjad, this is from Patna. And he writes this pamphlet, which is published, and I kind of go into great lengths talking about this pamphlet, as also the critique of another gentleman by the name of Maulana or Maulvi Tufail Ahmad Manglori. He's called a Maulvi because he just dresses like a Maulvi. He's very much an Aligarhian. He likes playing cricket, so on and so forth. But he also comes up with solid critiques of Pakistan. And what are some of the basic ideas in these critiques? The idea is that how can somebody like Mr. Jinnah, who's the most unobservant Muslim, how can he lead us to this Islamic state? That's one thing. In that context, they call him a Kafir-e-Azam as well. Secondly, they assail this hostage population theory, saying nowhere in the Quran or in Muslim texts is there any kind of support for such barbaric treatment of non-Muslims. Just because Muslims are getting persecuted here, you're not going to be persecuting the non-Muslims in Pakistan, who have nothing to do with the persecution of Muslims here, even if it is happening here. They also point out that where in history have we seen any major Islamic power going to the aid of Muslims? And because the other idea is, of course, that Pakistan also will come to the aid of the Indian Muslims in case they are persecuted by going to the UN or, in fact, declaring war on India. And in fact, the afterlife of this idea, in fact, I quote the journalist Shekhar Gupta. He had a piece on the politician Salman Taseer after he was assassinated. Yeah. And in which he talks about how they are going to the India Today office, in Connaught Place, and Shekhar Gupta is telling Salman Taseer कि भाई देखिए अगर आप कश्मीर चाहते हैं या तो what will happen to the Indian Muslims, because then the idea will be the idea will become stronger in the Hindu among the Hindus that these Muslims are not patriotic or anti-national, and they can't live with us, and so what will you do? And he says, well, हम इतने करोड़ मुसलमान पाकिस्तान में चूड़ियां पहन के नहीं बैठे हुए हैं, as if he's going to Pakistan is going to kind of come to the aid. It never happens. It's not going to happen. Yeah. If you take a look at the case of Bangladesh, in fact, quite the opposite is true. So the idea of Pakistan is severely criticized within the Muslim community by vocal critics who say that we need to be a part of an undivided India. But in the end, of course, the Muslim League wins the elections of 1945-46 as far as the Muslim seats are concerned. The Congress doesn't, and it's pretty clear that the Muslim League does stand for, or can be seen as the representative organization of the Muslims. I, of course, also go into a lot of poetry, and in fact, I also have a brief section on the Communist Party which supports the idea of Pakistan. And in fact, you have poets, including somebody like Asrarul Haq Majaz, who writes this, Pakistan ka Milli Tarana, but his own brother, this man by the name of Ansarul Haq Harwani, is, against the idea of Pakistan to a certain extent. Yeah. And so, in fact, it's very interesting, and I'll end with this, how somebody who is a communist, a leftist, somebody that is Asrarul Haq Majaz, how he kind of writes this poem on Pakistan, and I'll just quote it and I'll end it with this. आजादी की धुन में किसने हमें आज ललकारा, खैबर के गर्दून पर चमका एक हिलाल एक तारा, सब्ज हिलाली परचम लेकर निकला लश्कर हमारा, पर्वत के सीने से फूटा कैसा सरकश धारा, सरमाए का सूखा जंगल इसमें सुर्ख शरारा, पाकिस्तान हमारा पाकिस्तान हमारा पाकिस्तान हमारा. It goes on, but I think I'll stop since I can see Ishan.
Thank you so much, sir, for that very interesting argument, and that Pakistan was not insufficiently imagined as quoted, and that Jinnah Sahab knew what he was demanding and what were the repercussions or what were the end goals of his demand for a separate state, a separate Islamic state, as you said. You also mentioned in your book a non-UP wala, somebody who has nothing to do with the Uttar Pradesh thing, B.R. Ambedkar, and his stand on this whole demand, and then his denouncement of the sacrifice logic of Jinnah that you mentioned.
Yeah, I'm sorry. One of the things I forgot, and it's been such a long time now. I'm on to my second project and I'm deep into it. But one of the things I wanted to mention is that the public debate on Pakistan is inaugurated by none other than B.R. Ambedkar. So he writes this book called Thoughts on Pakistan. Yeah, the Lahore Resolution comes out in end March 1940. Yeah? March 23rd or 24th is when the Lahore Resolution is passed. And by August, just about 4 months, Mr. Ambedkar comes up with a 400-page text, a tract on Pakistan. And then it is basically Ambedkar's arguments for, Ambedkar's assessment or his thoughts on Pakistan, which are then used by both opponents as well as proponents of Pakistan. In fact, when Jinnah and Gandhi meet in 1944, they both refer to Ambedkar's text as the fundamental text that Indians should refer to in order to gain a better understanding as far as this whole debate on Pakistan is concerned. And Ambedkar is somebody who is against the idea of Pakistan. And, one of the arguments which has been made by, some critic is that Ambedkar was being rather opportunistic, let's say, because what he thought was once the Muslims get their Pakistan, in Hindu India, the quotas which would be vacated by the Muslims can be monopolized by the Dalits. Yeah. But one of the things that I quote in my book is Mr. Ambedkar writes this book called Thoughts on Linguistic States, which comes out in 1955. And in this, I quote, I was glad that India was separated from Pakistan. I was the philosopher, so to say, of Pakistan. I advocated partition because I felt it was only by partition that Hindus would not only be independent but free. If India and Pakistan had remained united in one state, Hindus, though independent, would have been at the mercy of the Muslims. A merely independent India would not have been a free India from the point of view of the Hindus. It would have been a government of one country by two nations. And of these two, the Muslims without question would have been the ruling race, notwithstanding the Hindu Mahasabha and the Jansangh. When the partition took place, I felt that God was willing to lift his curse and let India be one great and prosperous. It's a very stunning kind of statement coming from Ambedkar, because we basically have known Ambedkar as a critic of Gandhi, the Hindu Congress, and of course, the upper castes in India. But this book that he writes, Thoughts on Pakistan, and then later on the second edition of it is called Pakistan or the Partition of India. It comes up with fairly acute critiques of Pakistan. He's against the imposition of Urdu and so on and so forth. And he says just let go, and in fact compares the Muslim League to the Nazis. Anyways, I'll stop. Yeah.
Yes, and that is, I think, an interesting take on our understanding of Dr. Ambedkar also, and his thoughts on partition. There's also a question that why would UP Muslims, which constituted about less than 20% of the entire people, because in the talk we talked about the clergy, so to say, the Muslim clergy, be the ulemas and people like them, but 20% people, why would they be such ardent supporters of Jinnah's two-nation theory and Pakistan, in your opinion?
Okay. Again, this is a point in time. What happens is after the 1937 elections, in which the Congress sweeps the general constituencies, it does not even require any Muslim support to come to power. And the attempt at a coalition between the Congress and the Muslim League in the UP comes a cropper. And in fact, I've written a long piece on it, and I did send it to Ishan, and you may kind of circulate it among the audience. What the Muslim League then kind of argues is that in an undivided India, the Muslims are going to be a permanent, ineffective, impotent minority. as Jinnah himself says, the Hindu has 3 votes and the Muslim has 1 vote. Yeah. And so Mr. Jinnah then tells the UP Muslims कि भाई आपकी ये आप ये आप आपके साथ ये होने वाला है, आपके साथ ये हुआ है कि भाई आप यहाँ पे you are a small minority. Why do you want to kind of drag the Muslim majority provinces, the Punjabis, the Sindhis, the Pathans, into a similar situation as yours, in which at the All India center, it's again the Hindus who are going to dominate. So one is, of course, the language of sacrifice. 2, why don't you kind of make this sacrifice for the liberation of your majority province brethren. 2, the other idea is, of course, that you won't be as helpless, because there is this hostage population thing. 2, Pakistan will be a nation state. It will have all these Muslim countries behind it. And in case आपको कुछ होगा, तो हम, आपकी हिफाजत के लिए, अपने आप को पेश करेंगे. Of course, the idea that why can't you kind of sacrifice for a new Islamic state, a brand new experiment? And finally, the idea is that Mr. Jinnah also says, you are free to migrate to Pakistan. You will be welcomed. Or you can live in India as citizens of Pakistan. It's your choice. But of course, that choice is withdrawn very, very quickly. Once the partition happens, they only want to take in the Punjabis or whatever. Yeah, they don't want migration from UP. In fact, I end my book with a quote from Altaf Hussain. Yeah, the leader of the क्या कहते हैं, Muttahida Qawmi movement, yeah, or Muhajir Qawmi movement earlier, as it was called, and it's on YouTube. You can find it, yeah, in which he says कि this is the greatest blunder that we committed, and भैया हमें माफ करो और हमको पनाह दीजिए. So he ends with that. And in fact, at that point in time, Imran Khan was still a rising politician, yeah, and he filed a case in court accusing Altaf Hussain of treason. Yeah, so I don't know whether that court case is still going on or whatever it is, but so all these arguments are given to the UP Muslims कि भाई आप वहाँ migrate कर सकते हैं, and even after twin sovereignties emerge, आप यहाँ से frontier mail लेके तभी पाकिस्तान आ सकते हैं और फिर वापस भी आ सकते हैं. The idea that there would be this amount of violence and ethnic cleansing, I think that was perhaps not imagined, even though the rhetoric of the hostage population theory itself is extremely violent. Yeah, it's an open क्या कहते हैं, provocation for violent behavior. So these are some of the arguments which are made, but the hostage, there are no hostages left, at least in West Pakistan, as soon as, because of the enormous violence which happens in the Punjab. The only people who are left behind are the poor Dalits. Yeah. And in fact, our first High Commissioner, India's first High Commissioner in Pakistan, is this UP congressman by the name of Shri Prakash. And Shri Prakash asks लियाकत अली खान कि भैया इनको आप हिंदुस्तान आना चाहते हैं, त्योहार है, फेस्टिवल है, इनको आने दीजिएगा. And लियाकत says, if they leave and they don't come back, who's going to clean the streets and latrines of Karachi? So the Essential Services Maintenance Act is clamped down, yeah, to prevent these these Dalits from leaving Pakistan and coming to India. And if you have a population of the Hindu population, so-called Hindu population in Pakistan, it's predominantly the Dalits.
That's an important point that you have raised. We have some questions in the chat also for you.
हाँ, फरमाइए.
There is a question of Muhammad Ifhamuddin. What was the reaction of Muslims in South India to the idea of Pakistan?
Yeah, it's very interesting. In Madras, you have the Muslim League also, and it's headed by, there are several Ismails, yeah, because Nawab Ismail Khan is the head of the UP Muslim League, and then Muhammad Ismail is the head of the Madras Muslim League. And of course, they fully support the idea of Pakistan. And then later on, yeah, once Pakistan comes into existence, they demand, there is a demand for a Moplastan, and then the Muhammad Ismail says, okay, we don't mind being a part of Dravidistan of E.V. Ramaswamy Naikar. And in fact, E.V. Ramaswamy Naikar wants Jinnah to support Dravidistan, but Jinnah is focused on his Pakistan and says, you take care of yourself. आप अपना कीजिए, हम पाकिस्तान बनाना चाहते हैं, आप अपना बनाना चाहें तो बना लीजिएगा, लेकिन हमें उससे कोई लेना देना नहीं. So there is, of course, again, a strong, support from the Madras Muslim League party for, and in fact, a major historian of Pakistan, ideologue, who later wrote several books on partition Pakistan, Shariful Mujahid. He's a Madrasi Muslim. He comes from Madras, Tamil-speaking Muslim. Yeah. I'm sure you would have come across Shariful Mujahid's books if you have read some literature on the partition.
Yeah. And I forgot to mention that I also am speaking right now from Kanpur.
Kanpur se baat kar rahe hain. Yeah, I have a photograph, Mr. Jinnah in front of the Kanpur Muslim League, and that speech in which he talks about the sacrifice is made in Kanpur. Yeah, and this is पहली तस्वीर थी इसमें. अरे मालूम नहीं, इसमें वो तस्वीर नहीं है शायद, कई जगहों पे मालूम नहीं इसमें. How did it get maybe I'm not. Yeah, this is, you can see the Kanpur.
Yeah.
So yeah.
We have another question from Muhammad Ifhamuddin. What was the difference in What was the difference in public opinion towards the idea of Pakistan between Western UP and Eastern UP, since migration to Pakistan during partition happened mainly from Western UP?
As such, there is the Muslim League did find support in all areas of UP. Yeah. And I did not particularly perceive any difference, from between Eastern and Western UP. If you look at somebody like, say, Mahmoodabad, his estates are around Lucknow, Eastern UP. And he's the treasurer of the Muslim League. He's, in fact, Jinnah wants to anoint him as his heir apparent. And in fact, Mahmoodabad makes this very, during one of his speeches, he makes this very, very interesting claim that, this is such a unique thing which is happening, that the Sunnis are supporting a Shia Imam. He refers to Jinnah as a Shia Imam. Yeah. So that, even the Sunnis are paying obeisance, or, their homage to Mr. Jinnah. This is a moment in which there is an unprecedented unity, which is happening between Muslims belonging to different sects, different regions, speaking different languages. Yeah. And so therefore, in fact, I quote this man, Ashraf Ali, not Ashraf Ali Thanvi, K.M. Ashraf, because he talks about the kind of huge expectations, millenarian expectations, as far as Pakistan is concerned. And he says, yeah, and I say, as I write, Muslim socialists such as Sajjad Zahir and K.M. Ashraf were ordered by the Communist Party of India to go to Pakistan to foster, the branch of the Communist Party in the new country. Traveling to Pakistan on ship, K.M. Ashraf poignantly described the scene as refugees approached the promised land. I can never forget the scene we witnessed when on reaching the coast of Pakistan, the Islamic green flag with a crescent and star appeared before our eyes. The whole atmosphere immediately and spontaneously reverberated with the recitation of the ayahs from the Holy Quran, and the people shouted the takbir. All the immigrant passengers had tears in their eyes, as if the caravan of those performing hijrat from Makkah had reached Medina on the invitation of the Ansars, and now wealth would be equally distributed among the people according to their needs. In that situation, if I would have said to anyone that, like Indian self-serving leaders, the Pakistani leaders are also involved in the struggle for wealth, my life in the sea of honest believers would have been in danger. I had no option but to keep quiet and observe. So yeah, there is widespread support for the idea of Pakistan during this time period. But as I was also pointed out, there are sharp critiques of Pakistan which are made by Maulana Sayyid Muhammad Sajjad, Maulvi Tufail Ahmad Manglori, or this other man, Maulana Seharvi, kya naam pura Seharvi, who which tells you, it's been such a long time since I wrote this book. I'm forgetting even the full names. Yeah, I remembered the first two. Yeah, no, sorry, his name is Hifzur Rahman Seharvi. Yeah, who was the Nazim, the chief organizer of the Jamiat Ulama Hind in Delhi. And in fact, I kind of found these critiques. They're available in various libraries, but I personally collected them from the head office of the Jamiat Ulama Hind, which is at the Abdul Nabi Masjid, which is close to the ITO in Delhi. So I think वो आपके North Delhi campus के इर्द-गिर्द है ना?
Yes, sir.
So yeah, so that's the mosque which was built by the Emperor Akbar, I'm told. It's a beautiful mosque. And it's a very quiet place. It's really quiet. And if you kind of sit down to meditate, it's beautiful.
Yeah. So those were the questions from the audience. We have a comment from somebody called Lavanya. At the end of the day, 35 million Muslims remained in the India post-partition. We see what is being played out in India now. There seems to be no solution in sight. Kishan Patel asked, how did partition affect the Gujarati population? I think that's a question that you should ask an expert who has worked on Gujarat, for instance.
No idea. Yeah. See, the thing is, you work on areas and with languages that you can read, and you can use the materials, which is why, as I said, I'm presuming that a bunch of you and most kids in modern India, whether they are from North India, South India, East or West India, सब तो हिंदी जानते हैं. उर्दू लिपि सीखने में ज्यादा वक्त लगता नहीं है. आप 3-4 हफ्ते में उर्दू लिपि सीख सकते हैं, पढ़ सकते हैं, लिख सकते हैं, and then you have access to a different world altogether. So I would strongly encourage all of you to learn to read and write Urdu. Yeah. So even if you are budding historians, you're planning careers in history, आप अंग्रेजी sources के साथ कितना कुछ आप क्या history लिख सकते हैं. You'll be writing Brown Sahib history again. So if you want to be a historian true to your salt, you should be working in Indian languages.
Yeah.
And so do learn Urdu. आप सभी हिंदी जानते हैं, ठीक है, उर्दू के अल्फाज उसकी वोकैबुलरी अलग है, लेकिन the language, the grammar is the same. So it's you will be vastly expanding the areas in which you can work.
Yeah.
doesn't take much. I think, I'm sure now on YouTube also you will have lessons on how to kind of read or write Urdu. तो सीखने में कोई ज्यादा दिक्कत नहीं होनी चाहिए आपको.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So thank you so much, Dr. Dhulipala, for agreeing to do this and for delivering such a wonderful lecture. And whether people agree or not, or they can argue about it, but I think your work does provide a good insight or a new perspective to the whole partition tale, as opposed to other historians and other stalwarts, so to say, of the partition studies, and where you criticize them in your book very with points in detail, and you kind of reconstruct the image of Jinnah as in the book, as not a purely secular personality, but somebody with a with an idea of what he was doing, what he was demanding. So people can disagree or agree. That's
It's the, just read the book.
yeah. We have posted the link in the chat, so those who wish to get the book can click on that link. It's the Amazon India link. In India, it's available on Amazon, and if you can get it in Delhi in some bookstores, that's a good thing. Support bookstores rather than Amazon. So get this book, read it, and do share your opinions with us on Caravan Heritage at caravanheritage@gmail.com, which is our email ID. We also are we have started crowdfunding for supporting this initiative. So those who are listening to us, we have posted the link in the description of this video and also in the chat. So if you can donate something equivalent to the cup of coffee, which is 80-90 rupees or something, that would be great for us in sustaining Caravan. So please do support Caravan. It is India's leading students collective, independent students collective. We do not associate with any university, fortunately. So we kind of keep our thinking free and critical. So thank you so much, Dr. Dhulipala. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining in. We will be back with another session on 3rd of July, which is about archiving the partition voices, talking to young oral historians from India, Pakistan, and UK. From India, we have Achal Malhotra. From Pakistan, we have Anam Zakaria, who has worked on both Pakistan and now Bangladesh. And Kavita Puri, who has worked on Indians and Pakistanis who went to the UK after partition, who decided not to live in either of the two countries, and they kind of migrated to Britain with the English. So thank you so much, everybody. We will be back again. Keep supporting Caravan.
Thank you very much.